Hi everyone. I wanted to make a YouTube video to introduce myself, and so if we ever meet at some point, then you will know what I look like. I was over in the Business and Industry Center recently, and one of the students there said, "Hey, you're Mr. Ritzik. I recognize you from the video." So at least you'll recognize me if you run into one, we run into one another, if you're a nurse, or if you're working in some other field and we see each other. I just wanted to mention something to you that's really sort of interesting, talking about medicine and technology. I most often teach human services writing, technical communication, and police report writing. This last year in the technical communication, I did a couple of interesting assignments which I'll share with you, and some of you, they definitely relate to your major. We went over to the Business and Industry Center and we got a tour. But they have majors there that they didn't even have a few years ago, like mechatronics, robotics. Some students in our electronics program will transfer to Penn State and get into nanotechnology, which is a very big field, these days. And, many students that are in welding will also get into heating and air conditioning or electricity. And you can see the advantages of doing that. But something that we saw when we were over in the Business and Industry Center is Frank Gordowski, who's the coordinator of technologies. He showed us this 3D printer, and they've had it now for a few years. But it's really interesting because you can print out a part. So, say like you're making a new sprocket for a bicycle, and you want to have it geared a certain way, like if a person was, participating in a long distance bicycle race, but they wanted a particular type of rear sprocket kind of derailleur set up, they could actually print it out on this 3D printer, and it comes out sort of in a black resin. And what happens is, and they put it into this solution, and then the part actually works. It actually functions. It's really amazing. But what Frank Gordowski told us, which I found fascinating, is there was a boy in England who had cancer of his esophagus, and they were actually able to use imagery, radiology, to make a image of his esophagus, and they printed one out and they used DNA and they were able to insert it successfully. I believe also in this country there was a younger boy that had an airway problem, and they were able to print something out and insert it, and they were able to help him. So that technology, that 3D printing, is rather amazing. I actually saw this last year that there was a model and they printed out a 3D dress that fit her. It was a perfect fit. So you can imagine even other applications. Sometimes people complain that my blue jeans don't fit me really well, and you could have a custom made pair of pants that would fit, perfectly. So that's rather fascinating. Another item that we did this last year that I found really fascinating, we've done this for the last few years, we go over to the Nursing Simulation Lab over in Commissioner's Hall, which is next to the Nursing and Allied Health Division office over there. And students observe the simulation use. And what we do is we do a simulation with a juvenile diabetic patient, and then the nursing faculty will go through and they will use one simulation using layman's terms. And they'll say, like, for instance, you have high blood sugar, or you need to control your carbohydrate intake, and so on. And then what they do then is they do it using jargon or terminology like diaphoresis, which means excessive sweating, subcutaneous, which is just a shot that goes into the fat, it doesn't go into the muscle, hyperglycemia, hypoglycemia. And so what happens is nursing students, but also phlebotomy and rad tech and so on, they will use a simulation And so they will train as far as in learning how to insert a catheter into the urinary tract, how to draw blood effectively, but also how to listen to bowel soundings, or, if a person has pneumonia, what are some of the sounds that they have? And they can simulate that, and they say there's really not a significant difference between simulation and the other, in using real patients. So that's something that they use, which I find to be fascinating. And some years back, there was a pilot for U.S. Airways. I think his name was Captain Sullenberger or Captain Sully. I can't remember which. But they struck these birds while taking off from an airport in New York. And so they clogged the engine, and they could not make it back to Kennedy or LaGuardia Airport. So what they had to do is they had to land on the Hudson River, and he had practiced that so many times that he was able to actually go underneath a bridge and then go down in a certain descent so that the plane will not disintegrate upon impact with on the water. And I thought that that was fascinating, and that's a very good example. And then we also do one other item where we go into the RadTech department, and the coordinator over there, Director David McBride, he gives us a tour. It's amazing though what can be done with radiology these days that could not be done a few years ago. They even do vascular radiology or radiography, where they can look at and see, in your neck, your carotid artery, where is it clogged, or if a woman is having a hard time conceiving to have a child, what's the problem? Is there a blockage in the fallopian tubes, or with her husband? Is there a blockage in the testes area as far as preventing sperm from going through or whatnot? And that's fascinating to me, and so I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the technology that is used today. And like I said, it's really pretty good. With this class, I also wanted to tell you, as you go through and do your research paper, make sure to save your source and source information. If you print it out, and of course if you don't necessarily need to do that. But keep it in a folder, especially keep your drafts and whatnot, and then of course keep your drafts and your preliminary bibliography and so on. Keep them in a place where you can access them again, and you may be able to do a speech on them for effective speech, or for psychology, or anatomy and physiology, human biology, and so on. Keep the information. You may be able, to reuse it. For this particular class, too, I don't have a problem if you use one of those citation generators like EasyBib.com, or you could also use through Word. There's a citation generator that you can use. It's much easier, and these days citing sources has become more complex. We use the Modern Language Association format for this class, which is actually the standard one that most people use, and it's fairly easy to document. The APA, which we'll talk about a little bit in this class, is more complex, and there's more rules to it, and even in text citations, and then even like the level of formality and how you write in an APA paper, it's slightly different. I also wanted to mention a couple of other terms to you. For this class, I have you do a preliminary bibliography. Some professors will have you do what's called an annotated bibliography, okay? And an annotated bibliography is simply a overview of your sources, so a listing of your sources, but a short paragraph to summarize what the source says. So if you have to do that, that is in essence what it is. Some professors also will require, after your works cited, they will have to include what's called a works consulted page. Works consulted are sources that you actually used in writing the paper for information, but you didn't cite directly. So I had somebody that wrote about hepatitis a couple years ago, and so they consulted the physician's desk reference. They consulted some sites from the Center for Disease Control that they use as background information. There's a book called the Merck Manual. It's a medical website and book that's used by many physicians, so they consulted that. So that's really, what that is. Works cited is really only the sources that you cited and actually used in the paper itself. So we will do in this class, we will do 2 drafts of the paper, and then we'll do a final copy. Now with the research paper itself, a couple of things that I would tell you about for you to definitely consider. First of all, if you can use images in a research paper, it's very, very helpful. Several years ago, I had a young woman in this class who wrote about melanoma or skin cancer, and she went to a Catholic high school, and the girls were required to wear, young ladies, I guess, instead of saying girls, but anyhow, they were required to wear a skirt and a white blouse and so on. And so she got into tanning, so she wouldn't look so pale. And what happened is she got skin cancer on her right leg, on the back, and also on her back. And she actually included photographs from the dermatologist, which I thought were really helpful. And she also included other pictures of skin cancer. So including visuals in a research paper these days is very, very useful. Naturally, you can include YouTube videos. Charts or graphs or tables are useful to show something. For example, a couple years ago, somebody did one on HPV, which is the human papillomavirus, and people today, both younger men and women, get that Gardasil vaccine, through their pediatrician or family doctor to prevent that. But she did a chart, and it was from, I believe, Newsweek or Time, and it showed the number of people between the ages of 13 and 23 that were infected with this HPV virus, and the number of people, especially the number of women that got cervical cancer, and it was really, really eye-opening. Some years back, I saw a chart on the number of people that were intoxicated after 2 o'clock a.m. on a weekend, and it was something like 35 or 40%. It was really rather eye-opening. The other point that I would encourage you to do when you do a research paper is at the very beginning, you can say, here's a listing of 5 topics that I will be covering, and then you can use headings in your paper and also subheadings. Now, the advantage of that is once you get to the end of a section, you can use a summary and a review section of the paper, which really helps to review and connect back to your thesis. I definitely encourage you, if you've had personal experiences or want to include interviews or other experiences of other people that you'd want to write about, you certainly could do that. It makes the research paper more relevant and readable. What I don't like is reading a paper, and I know other people feel the same way, that just basically is one source after another, where the person isn't advancing a thesis, isn't really making any connections, and it's just dry, tedious reading. I can't tell you how much more advantageous it is when you write a research papers, when you use headings and subheadings, when you use some visuals, when you use some personal experiences, when you have some varied sources, not only just web sources, but interviews and so on. Whatever you do, don't rely solely on Google. If you want to use Google Scholar, as I said in the past, that's fine. Definitely shy away from using Wikipedia. It's not a really reliable source. Our reference librarian, Kathleen Keefe, always says a good place to start with research is Encyclopedia Britannica. That's available through our WCCC website. You can use encyclopedia articles from there. They have websites, they have books, they have periodicals, and there's also a reference one called Credo Reference that's available, and they have a really cool visual organizers type of feature, but good reference background information. And of course, EBSCOhost is the one you'll probably get the most information from. But we also now have ebooks that are available through EBSCOhost, and there's also an ebook site at the WCCC library site. So I would encourage you to consider that. And as you work through your research paper, make it a little bit more varied instead of just a text-only paper with websites. Try to incorporate a little bit more of a variety into it. I hope this information was helpful. Thank you.